Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Florida State Seminoles set to hold one of the more special and loaded recruiting weekends that we've seen in the 2023 season as they host the Miami Hurricanes. And you take a look at the success that Mike Norvell is having on the field. How do you ensure that success happens year over year and it's not just a flash in the pan? It's stacking these recruiting classes like Mike Norvell is doing. You see the culture, it's in place. Now you're getting the talent in place. That is how you create something special. That's kind of what I think is happening in Tallahassee. I very rarely, and many of you guys have heard me talk recruiting a lot, I very rarely use the words program changing recruit, program changing commit. In this case, the amount of talent that they're going to have on campus this weekend, it very well could be program changing. Really excited to get into some of the visitors that will be on campus. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. The amount of support, and especially from the Florida State fans, has been absolutely amazing. You all know I love talking this program and what Mike Norvell is doing. The amount of support y'all show means a lot. If you do enjoy the content, you want to support the fellas, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further, and actually, Florida State fans, we might see a few commitments come out of this weekend, and we'll be talking about it if it happens. So then, stay locked in. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. And without further ado, let's get into this. And I want to first start with how special this class already is. I mean, it is a top 5 recruiting class, but more importantly than just the top 5 ranking, how complete it is, right? You take a look at who they have already in the boat. Luke Kromenhoek, one of the best quarterbacks in the 2024 cycle. Mike Norvell, we've talked about this, doing a phenomenal job with the early identification of Luke. I mean, and this is a guy that's just risen up the recruiting rankings as he continues to ball out his junior and senior year. You take a look at the secondary, KJ Bolden, Charles Lester. We noted that maybe the biggest gap in this class was along the defensive line. What do? They go out and flip Armando Blunt from that Miami Hurricanes class to Florida State. This is just a class that's not only has the top tier talent, it also has a complete, kind of a positionally very complete. You don't look at this class and say, oh, they're really lacking on the offensive line or the defensive line or at the wide receiver position. It's a really good class for Florida State. Really excited to see what they can do to continue to build it. Let's get into the visitor list. And I mean, you have to start. Florida State fans know what's going down. The number 1 recruit in the country, the number 1 wide receiver in the class, Jeremiah Smith. And I'm not going to get up here and say it's going to be easy to flip Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. They have a proven track record with developing wide receivers. The narrative with Jeremiah Smith was always committed to Ohio State, the Florida Gators making a push. I think that narrative has now flipped to committed to Ohio State, the Florida Seminoles making a strong push at Jeremiah Smith. And a couple things that I think can be special in this Jeremiah Smith recruitment is, one, the success that Florida State has had with these wide receivers. I mean, Coleman, Johnny Wilson, 2 guys that very well might likely go in that first round of the NFL draft. More importantly, what does that leave? Maybe a little gap of talent, maybe a little opportunity for Jeremiah Smith to come in as a true freshman and be a guy that's getting consistent playing time for Ohio State. Can you necessarily say that in the 2023 class, they brought in 3 5-star wide receivers? So you're looking at Jeremiah Smith saying, I could go to Ohio State. I'd probably have to maybe sit the bench for that first year, kind of like Marvin Harrison Jr. did. Or I could go to Florida State that's going to be competing for a national title. But I have the opportunity to play as a true freshman with guys like Coleman and Johnny Wilson potentially going to the NFL draft. The selling point for Jeremiah Smith, also being in the state of Florida, I think is really strong for Florida State. And a very similar conversation can be had with Coleman, who, if you're asking me who I think is more likely to end up in this Florida State class, I'd probably say Coleman. And again, very similar selling points that you have for Jeremiah Smith in terms of you're a difference maker, you could play early, but more importantly, you look at Texas A&M. I mean, there might be some head coaching changes. Jimbo Fisher, I don't know if he'll be back in 2024. The way they are playing, they're underperforming in a massive way. And Coleman, going back to when he committed to Texas A&M on July 4th, it was a weird one. It felt weird for people who follow recruiting. The buzz was always around the Auburn Tigers, and seemingly out of nowhere, on the night of July 4th, he commits to Texas A&M. I think a lot of people in the industry thought, like, we're not sure if that one's going to stick. So you're looking at potential decommitment targets. Coleman and Texas A&M certainly would be at the top of the list. And if you can grab one of Jeremiah Smith or Cam Coleman and you look at Hakeem Williams in the 2023 class, you have to be extremely excited about what that wide receiver room is going to look like in the future. And again, for Florida State, like you take a look 3 years ago with that wide receiver room, it was one of the worst in the ACC. Now you're looking at a Florida State wide receiver room that's one of the best in the country. So the wide receiver destination in Tallahassee getting a lot more attractive. Next guy I want to talk about, Jason Zander, and this one I would for sure have highlighted if I'm a Florida State fan. Many people probably recognize the name Jason Zander, was trending to Florida State for a long time in his recruitment and then commits to USC. Now, when you look at USC, similar conversation we had with Texas A&M, there's going to be some coaching changes. You already saw them just fire the defensive coordinator. I think there could be changes at the offensive line coaching positions as well. Jason Zander, a Florida kid, it's going to be difficult for USC to continue to pursue Jason Zander when they're all the way out on the West Coast. The USC team significantly underperforming. And Jason Zander was trending to Florida State for a while in his recruitment until he committed to USC. Getting him back on campus, you have to like where Florida State stands and potentially flipping Jason Zander in a very similar conversation that we just had with Cam Coleman and Jason Zander. A very similar conversation happens with Kai Bates, who cornerback committed to LSU. If you follow what LSU is doing on the football field, not only underperforming, but that secondary is a disaster. And I think you might see some coaching changes with that position group as well. When the coaching changes happen, that's when the commitments start decommitting. And I think Kai Bates, a guy from the state of Florida, could certainly be someone that Mike Norvell targets and goes after. I love what Mike Norvell is doing. He's looking at some of these commits who are committed to schools that might see coaching changes, have a little turmoil within the program, and saying, guess what? There ain't no turmoil in Tallahassee right now. It's a stable place. We're winning a lot of football games. He's going after those guys. I think it's a brilliant strategy. Now, those are the top targets in 2024. You could also include guys like Wardell Mack, and I would note a ton of Florida State commits are going to be here too, so you're getting a chance to meet the guys that you could potentially be playing ball with. But I also want to look at the future, right? And we talk about this a lot. It's about stacking really talented classes on top of each other. Florida State, the visitor list for the 2025 class is almost more impressive than what you have in 2024. And we just talked about 2 top 10 guys and another top 50 guy. You look at 2024, let's start with the number 1 recruit in the country, offensive tackle David Sanders from the state of North Carolina. You're going to have the number 1 recruit in the 2024 class and in the 2025 class in Tallahassee on the same week. And David Sanders, freak show athlete, 6'6", 270, yes, needs to put on some weight. How this guy moves, it's just different. And I love that, right? If we need to put on some weight on you, sure, we'll do that when you get to school. You can't teach the athleticism in the big body David Sanders Jr. has. That's why he's the number 1 commit or recruit in the country. That's really exciting. Another guy I'm looking at, and again, this is Davidson. It kind of goes to like the swing and the power that Mike Norvell has on the recruiting trail. Like Florida State can just throw their hat in the ring for any of these guys, and they're getting them on campus. The next guy I want to talk about, and a guy that seems like Florida State has a shot with, Ellis Williams. He's committed to Georgia, has been committed for almost a year now, committed back in April of 2023. Similar to Landon Thomas, wants to go to Georgia for the tight ends. And what did Florida State do? They flipped Landon Thomas's commitment. I think you could see something happen with Ellis Williams as well. He's already been in Tallahassee multiple times. You look at the pass catchers, specifically in that tight end group, Jaheim Bell, Kyle Morlock, having good years. Ellis Williams, again, I use this term freak show for David Sanders, probably going to use the same word for Ellis Williams, 6'7", 235, phenomenal athlete for that size. You talk about a difference maker, Johnny Wilson type mismatch nightmare. I think Ellis Williams is kind of that guy. A couple other guys to keep in mind on, and we could run down the whole list and take us like 45 minutes. Top 10 prospect DJ Pickett, 5-star wide receiver Jamie French. The amount of loaded guys in the 2024 class and the 2025 class that will be in Tallahassee, it's going to be – I haven't seen a recruiting weekend like this, to be quite frank. And you look at what it's going to look like. I mean, they had a massive recruiting weekend for the night game against Duke. What happens a couple days later? Armando Blunt flips his commitment from the Hurricanes to Florida State. It's going to be an unreal environment at the Doak. This is a massive opportunity for Mike Norvell to get a ton of traction on the recruiting trail. I'm fired up for what Mike Norvell is doing. I'm fired up to see if they get any commitments. You might get one tomorrow as well. We'll talk about that if it does happen. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.